waitress moved through the cafe the way a gentle breeze moves through a window present, but easy to miss if you were not paying attention. She had been working there for months, always keeping her eyes down, always focusing on her trays, glasses, and orders. People noticed her, of course, but only in the way people notice background music there, but not important enough to think about for more than a second. She didn't mind that. In fact, she preferred it. She felt safer in silence. The cafe itself was always alive. Every evening it filled with people coming from their offices, students carrying laptops, and older folks who simply wanted company. The lights were warm, the walls were decorated with old photographs, and the air carried the constant smell of roasted coffee and fresh pastries. Near the center of the room stood an old upright piano. It was tall, scratched, and slightly out of tune, but it looked charming, like it had stories trapped inside its wooden frame. Most days it went untouched. Sometimes a visiting musician played it for an hour or two, but mostly it sat there as part of the decor. The waitress avoided looking at it because every time she did, a weight pulled at her chest. The piano reminded her of a life she had walked away from, a life filled with music. Practice rooms, early mornings, late nights, and a dream that once felt bright. She had learned the piano when she was small, and it had become her favorite escape. She used to spend hours every day practicing, not because anyone forced her, but because she loved it deeply. Music had been her home. But that home had broken after a difficult time in her family, and she had pushed the piano away the same way she pushed her emotions away. Since then, she had not played in public, not even once. Working in the cafe kept her busy. It kept her mind elsewhere. She didn't need to think. She just needed to smile politely, carry plates, and remember orders. People thought she was shy, but the truth was simpler. She didn't want to take up space. She didn't want to be seen. Being invisible felt easier. One evening, the cafe was unusually crowded. A company group filled half the hall, laughing loudly, celebrating some office success. The other tables were full, two couples on quiet dates, friends sharing desserts, and a few tourists taking photos. The atmosphere was cheerful and warm. The waitress was carrying a tray of drinks toward a table when someone called her name from behind. She turned slightly and the tray tilted. She didn't drop anything, but the edge of the tray brushed against the side of the upright piano. A hollow sound echoed, just a thump, nothing serious. Still, a few people noticed. One of the customers from the office group laughed and said loudly, "Careful there. Don't break the piano. It probably plays better than you do." A few others chuckled. They weren't being cruel, just careless. They had no idea how their words landed. The waitress forced a small smile, nodded, and kept walking. Her heart had dropped to her stomach, but she hid it well. She had learned how to hide things. The words echoed in her mind anyway, not because they were true, but because they hid a part of her she kept buried. She brushed past it and continued working, pretending nothing had happened. An hour later, something unexpected occurred. The cafe had booked a musician to perform soft background music, but the manager received a message that the musician couldn't make it due to an emergency. The manager groaned, rubbed his forehead, and looked around helplessly. The crowd was bigger than usual. They had expected music, he joked to the staff. "Unless one of you can play piano, we're out of luck." Everyone laughed, including the staff. Then one of the younger baristas pointed toward the waitress and said teasingly, "Ask her. She's quiet enough to be a musician." The others chuckled. The waitress felt her face warm. She shook her head quickly and tried to walk away, but the manager called out playfully, "Hey, want to give it a try? Just one song? The hall's already full. You'll get applause even if you only hit one note." The nearby customers heard this too and started whispering. A few joked, "Let her try." Someone else added, "Why not? It'll be fun." The waitress froze. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to embarrass herself, but she also didn't want to seem rude. Her heart raced. Her palms felt damped. The manager noticed her hesitation and softened his voice. "Only if you want to. No pressure." The strange thing was, she did want to. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something stirred, something small, shaky, and long forgotten. She looked toward the piano. For a brief second, she imagined herself sitting there again, her fingers moving, the music flowing like water. But then the fear returned just as quickly. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed again? Her throat felt tight. She whispered, I can try. The moment she said it, the cafe fell unusually quiet. Not silent, but curious. People turned their heads. Some leaned forward. Even the office group paused their loud celebration. The waitress walked slowly toward the piano, each step heavy. She could feel dozens of eyes following her. She kept her hands close to her body, almost as if she wanted to hide them. Her breath came out uneven. As she reached the piano, she rested her hand on the faded wooden top. It felt familiar, almost comforting. She hesitated, afraid to open the lid. When she finally lifted it, the keys looked the same as every piano she had ever known, black and white, simple yet powerful. Ordinary yet full of stories. She sat on the bench and adjusted her apron nervously. Someone in the background whispered, "Is she really going to play?" Another person said, "Maybe she knows one easy tune." Someone else chuckled softly. Every sound made her shoulders tense. She placed her hands on her lap. For a moment she couldn't move. The room felt too big. The silence around her felt too heavy. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. A memory surfaced, sitting beside her father at an old piano at home. He had placed her small hands on the keys and said gently, "Music is not about being perfect. It's about letting your heart speak." She opened her eyes again. Her hands rose slowly and rested on the keys. They felt cool, smooth, familiar. She pressed one key lightly. A soft note filled the cafe. It was small, almost shy, but it carried through the room like a whisper. The room became still. She took another breath, then another, and she played one more note, then a third. Each sound felt like peeling away a layer of time, like rediscovering a part of herself she had lost. Despite the soft start, people leaned closer. The laughter died down. The whispers faded. Even those who had mocked her earlier were now watching in quiet anticipation. The waitress sat there with her fingers resting on the keys, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She wasn't sure if she could play a whole piece. She wasn't even sure if her hands would listen to her. But one thing was clear: the moment she touched the piano, the room, and her life shifted, if only by a small degree, and everyone in that large cafe hall waited to see what the quiet, unnoticed waitress would do next. The quiet waitress sat at the piano with her fingers resting on the keys, the entire cafe watching her with an attention she had never felt before. For a moment she didn't move. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the soft chatter that still lingered in the corners of the large hall. The warm lights above reflected gently on the polished keys, and for a second she felt that old familiar fear rise again, the fear that had kept her silent for so many years. But there was also something else, a tiny spark she had almost forgotten existed. She closed her eyes, took in a slow breath, and let her fingers press down on the first full chord. The sound was gentle, almost fragile, but it carried through the air like a small wave spreading across a still lake. A few people straightened in their seats. Someone leaned forward, resting both elbows on their table. A spoon froze in midair as someone paused while eating. The room, which had been full of laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations only minutes earlier, now seemed to breathe with her. Her fingers moved to the next chord, then the next. The melody began to form, soft and emotional, like a story told without words. She wasn't playing anything from a book. She wasn't following notes or sheet music. She was playing something that lived inside her, a tune she had composed in moments when she had felt lost, a tune she had whispered to the keys back when she still believed in music. It was sad, but not in a painful way. It carried a warmth, a quiet hope, a softness that made people feel something they didn't expect to feel in a busy cafe hall. As she kept playing, her body slowly relaxed. Her shoulders dropped. Her fingers loosened. Her breathing grew steadier. The room around her seemed to fade away, and she saw only the piano, only the keys, only the flow of notes. She had forgotten this feeling, the way the music filled her chest, the way it made everything else disappear. It felt like returning home after being gone for a long, long time. The customers listened in silence. Some had expected her to play a simple tune, maybe a children's song or a clumsy beginner's melody, but what they heard was something else entirely. It was delicate yet strong, emotional yet controlled. It sounded like someone telling a story with every movement of her hands. The melody rose a little, lifting the room with it. A woman sitting near the corner felt her eyes grow warm. A man who had been laughing loudly earlier now sat with his hands folded, watching quietly. A young couple exchanged glances, surprised by how deeply the music touched them. Even the office group, who had been the loudest in the hall minutes ago, sat still as if afraid to interrupt the moment. The waitress felt her fingers moving faster now, not out of fear but out of emotion. The music picked up slightly, the middle section of her piece flowing like a river after rain. Her memories came back in flashes, sitting at home practicing the same movement over and over, learning to correct her mistakes, smiling when she finally got it right, feeling proud when her father clapped softly behind her. Those memories made her chest ache, but they also gave strength to the music coming from her hands. Halfway through her performance, she suddenly felt the emotion tighten her throat. A wave of sadness hit her, not the kind that breaks you, but the kind that reminds you of something precious you lost. For a moment, her fingers trembled, and one note came out slightly uneven. A few people noticed, but instead of judging, they leaned even closer, drawn in by the honesty in the music. Imperfection made it more human, more real. She felt tears forming, blurring her vision. She blinked them back, took a shaky breath, and let the music guide her forward. Her hands found the next notes almost by instinct, like they remembered the path even when her mind didn't. The melody softened again, turning gentle, tender, as if comforting her while she played it. The room stayed completely silent. Even the staff behind the counter stopped what they were doing and watched her with wide eyes. No one moved. No one whispered. It was as if the whole world had paused just to listen to her dot as she approached the ending. The notes became slower, lighter, like footsteps fading into the distance. She lifted her hand slightly, letting the final chord ring through the hall. The sound lingered in the air for a long moment, floating gently before fading into a soft silence. When the last note disappeared, the room fell absolutely still. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No clapping, no voices, no movement. It was as if everyone needed a moment to breathe again. Then the applause started. It began softly, from a single pair of hands. Then another joined, and another. And within seconds the entire cafe hall erupted into applause. People stood up from their chairs. Some whistled. Some clapped above their heads. Some simply smiled with tears in their eyes. The waitress sat frozen on the bench, overwhelmed. She had never expected this. She had expected to mess up, to shake nervously through a few notes, to finish quickly and rush away. But what she received instead was something she had never felt before. People truly seeing her, hearing her, appreciating her. A few customers came forward, but they kept a respectful distance, not wanting to crowd her. One person said softly, "That was beautiful." Another whispered, "Thank you for playing." Someone else added, "Your music touched my heart." She could hardly respond. Her voice felt stuck inside her throat. The manager approached her with a warm smile, clearly moved. He didn't tease her this time. He didn't joke. He simply said, "I didn't know you could do that." There was admiration in his voice, not surprise, not disbelief, but genuine admiration. "If you ever want to play again, the piano is yours." She didn't know what to say. She nodded slowly, wiping the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. The applause continued behind her, gradually fading into warm conversations about her performance. People were discussing the music, describing how it made them feel, replaying moments of the melody. For once, the topic wasn't someone's workday, someone's phone, or someone's plans. It was her. The waitress stood from the bench and gently closed the piano lid. Her hands were still slightly shaking, not from fear now, but from the emotional weight of what she had just shared. She took a small step back, looking at the piano with a softness she hadn't felt in years. It no longer looked like a reminder of pain. It looked like a friend she had finally reunited with. As she moved back to her work area, people smiled at her, some giving small nods of respect. Even those who had laughed earlier now looked at her differently. Their expressions carried apology, admiration, and something else, something like wonder. She continued working, but she wasn't the same anymore. Her steps felt lighter. Her heart felt warm. She could still feel the echoes of the piano in her fingertips. Later that night, when the cafe began closing, the hall was quiet again. She wiped a table near the piano and paused for a moment, looking at it in the dim evening light. She placed her hand on the wooden frame and smiled softly. She had spent so long hiding from the world, convinced that her voice didn't matter, that her presence didn't make a difference. But for a few minutes, in a room full of strangers, she had spoken louder than ever before. Without saying a single word, the music had spoken for her. As she turned off the lights and prepared to leave, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. A small, gentle hope, like the first note of a song she had yet to finish. She walked out of the cafe that night not as the quiet waitress people overlooked, but as someone who had touched hearts, someone who had changed the atmosphere of an entire room with nothing but a melody, and deep inside, she knew one thing for sure: she would play again.